Hi, everybody. This is David P. France. I'm coming to you from Basel, Switzerland. And before we get started, I want to make sure that you guys like the video, share the video, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, David P. France TV. Today, I'm speaking with someone who, longtime colleague, known her for many, many, many years. And we'll get into that later, right? But I'm speaking with Monique El-Faizy. She is based in Paris. How you doing, Monique?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Look, I'm doing well. I'm very, very happy. You guys, I'm very happy that I'm interviewing. It's almost like this is the conversation I probably wanted to have with you 30 years ago, but you didn't have all this other stuff.
Yeah, I probably couldn't have had this conversation 30 years.
Well, I'm going to read straight, from the bio. So you guys pardon me as I turn my head to this other computer. Monique El-Faizy is a Paris-based journalist with more than 20 years experience. A little bit more now, right?
Yeah, exactly. I should update that.
She has written for a wide variety of publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, The Financial Times, France 24, Marie Claire, GQ, Glamour, Moscow Magazine, and the Moscow Guardian. And she's also lived and worked in Egypt, Russia, Europe, Asia, and the United States, covering beats ranging from Wall Street to the Arab American community. And she's held staff positions at the New York Daily News, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Associated Press, and the Record of Hackensack, and was a medical blogger for AOL's parent Dish. And that's only, skimming the surface, because there's a lot more. Also, I want to tell everybody, Monique is also a University of Pennsylvania alum. And as you guys know, I'm very, very supportive of my school. And so big ups to Penn. Anybody that's watching this, make sure that you definitely like and subscribe and share, right? So Monique, tell us what's going on. I mean, there's a lot happening in the world. And, you guys should know that she is a co-author as well, which I forgot, of this book, and I have it here, All the President's Women, with Barry Levine and Monique El-Faizy, and Donald Trump and the Making of a Predator. You guys can see here. But we're going to talk about that a little later. First, we're going to talk about, Monique, but, what are your thoughts of what's happening now? We have this breaking news with regard to Ghislaine Maxwell, which is, the topic is somewhat related, not directly related to what you've covered in the past.
Yeah, they're in the book. Yeah, and Epstein's in the book because he and Trump had a relationship.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Hold on, I'm also gonna, I think I need to, sorry, David, charge my computer. Sorry.
Don't worry.
Trump was actually accused, not to go too quickly into this, but Trump was actually accused of raping a girl at Epstein's mansion in New York. So, so the links are there.
And do you think, I'm not going to stay too long on this. What do you think is happening now? I mean, do you get a sense that this arrest is being directed by the Trump? I mean, feel free to say whether you even think or not, or if you know, or it's just a guess.
No.
You think it's directed by someone who is not in Trump's camp, right? What are your thoughts on it, just in general?
I think a lot of people have a vested interest in not having her arrested. And I think that's why she has been free. It's been a year already since Epstein, more than a year, I think, since Epstein was arrested. I think he killed himself. If he killed himself last July or August, I can't remember. It was late summer. Look, she knows all the secrets. She knows who was there, and there is zero question in my mind that there were a lot of powerful men who went in and out of that mansion and onto that island. And she knows, she's got the guest book. She knows who they were. So I think that it was in a lot of people's interest that she stay in the wind.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. And it's almost like I always say every summer there's some big story. So this story reminded me of the Princess Diana story for whatever reason. It just did, right? That magnitude, or JFK Jr. Off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. 9/11, or at least, everything. I see it as a bigger silent
I think
war.
it is, and I think there's a royal element to it.
There's
right. There's a little delay.
What did you say? A what to it?
I think I'm talking over you a little because there's a
No.
lag, I think.
No, that's okay.
There's a royal element to it too,
Yeah.
because Prince Andrew is implicated in a lot of these stories.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about you, right? Because I think this is very interesting. You're a very interesting person. What are you're currently living in Paris? Mm-hmm. What's going on with you with regard to your? I know that you have a project coming up. What's going on with you? Tell us a little bit more about what it's like to live in Paris. Really live around all over the world, but we can start with Paris.
I mean, it's, right now in these COVID times, it's pretty comforting to be here, because the French government, even though the French are all complaining about how the government handled it, they handled it pretty well. They locked us down pretty severely, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
For 2 months, we needed a form to go out. The police could check. There were only 5 reasons you were allowed out of the house. The police would stop you and check you and fine you. And it was pretty intense. And yet now we're all out and about. Restaurants are open, bars are open. I think movie theaters opened recently. Clubs are still closed. But there are really low levels of the virus. So, it's comforting to be in a country where the government sort of acted very quickly, acted in the best interest of the population, put into place financial support for everybody. There's free healthcare. So it doesn't feel like a terrible place to be right now. I mean, I'm sure it's the same or similar to where you are.
Yeah. I mean, we were out a couple of weeks ago, but as of Monday, we all have to wear masks again because there was a slight uptick in Switzerland in terms of the COVID, right? So
we see that here. So far, we haven't seen that. They've seen little clusters, and what they've tried to do is isolate those clusters very quickly, as opposed to a general lockdown. There are 2 schools in Paris that got shut down in the last week. The school's out now, but we'll finish Saturday. School finished this past week.
How did you get started in journalism? I mean, that's what I think is the question I have. How did you get started? I mean, what was the...
Kind of by an accident. So my plan, I had taken this class at Penn with Leon Higginbotham.
Yes.
Do you remember who he was?
Yes.
Great hero of the civil rights movement and civil rights law.
Judge. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the Third Circuit, right? He was on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals at the time. And he really inspired me and made me want to become a civil rights lawyer. But as you know, my parents aren't American, and I had grown up in the States, and I also wanted to be closer to my family. My mother's family was in Amsterdam. I had a relative here in Paris that I was really close to. So the deal I made with my father is after college, I would take 2 years off, or maybe the deal was a year, come to Paris, get a job here for a year, polish my French, be close to my family here and in Amsterdam, and then go back to law school. I come here, my friends have all started law school, and they're miserable, right? First year law school, not fun. So I'm watching them suffer. And I had gone, before I came here, I'd gone to Moscow. I'd studied Russian at Penn, and I'd gone to Moscow on a language program. So I spent 2 months there, fell in love with it. And I was there for the first election, just as they were kind of making small steps toward, you couldn't call it democracy, but towards opening up a little bit.
Right.
Democracy would be overstating it. And then I came here, and I was looking for a job here. And every time I would get a job, I would look for a job here, somebody would offer me a job in Moscow. So I was here for a few months, got a job because I spoke Russian, got a job in Moscow teaching English. So I went back there, and everything was unfolding. I came back, the Berlin Wall came down. Things were really opening up. And I fell into a crowd of journalists here, photojournalists actually,
Yeah.
and they were traveling all over the world, having this incredible life, really on the cutting edge of what was happening. And it felt like they were having an impact. The reason I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer was to change the world, right? And it felt
Right.
like journalism was another way of doing that.
Mm, mm,
And so I think the combination of, well, and then I went back to Moscow. I decided that maybe I wanted to be a journalist. I went back to Moscow, got a
mhm.
job as a journalist, and the coup happened and communism collapsed.
Right.
And that kind of sealed it for me. I mean, it was so exciting to be on the front, to have a front row seat to that. And, that compared with my friends struggling through law school, I just thought, no, I'm going to be a journalist. This looks like
Right.
way more.
So
Sadly,
let me ask you real quick. So you were getting job offers from Moscow. What kind of jobs were they offering you? Were they journalism jobs or?
No, I mean, so the first job I got offered there was to teach English.
Okay.
And then when I started, and then I came back to Paris, had decided I wanted to be a journalist or to try it. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it forever. Started looking for jobs here, and I interviewed with W Magazine. And the editor of W said to me, he had an opening, but he said to me, look, Paris is filled with young Americans who want to be writers. You speak Russian, go to Moscow, get a job in Moscow. And I thought, okay. So, I'd been there before. So I took a 3-day train to Moscow, decided I'd sublet my apartment in Paris. This is what you do when you're in your 20s, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Decided I'd give myself a month in Moscow. And if I couldn't find a job within a month, I'd come back to Paris. And my first night there, a friend of a friend invited me to a party of journalists. And I went and I met the guy who hired me for my job. My first job there. I had a couple.
Yeah,
So it was,
okay.
it was a lucky break too.
Right, well, yeah, okay. So all right. So how long were you in Moscow? I mean, what types of things did you cover there, and how long were you there for?
So for 2 years, I was back and forth between Paris and Moscow, and ended up doing a year in both, but broken up. So the first time I was in Moscow, I was teaching, studying. The second time I was teaching English. And then as a journalist, I got there in January of 1991. So in the beginning, it was pretty dead because the Gulf War was on, and really the only thing getting covered was the Gulf War. And then, Moscow, the politics started to bubble up. Gorbachev was having trouble with other members of the Politburo, and there were demonstrations in the streets all the time. And, it was kind of heating up. So because I was working in television at the time. So we were getting on air more. I was doing both print and TV. And then in August, when Gorbachev went on vacation to his dacha, history was made, right? They detained him at his dacha. They took over the government, and that's when the coup happened. And then, that got on Denver. I mean, the story, but so, so Russia really, or the Soviet Union really heated up when I was there. I got very lucky, and it was an incredibly exciting time. And, we had the collapse of communism there, the kind of the whole Eastern Bloc falling. It felt historic. I mean, it was historic.
It was, yeah, sure. Amazing. And so after that stint, did you go back to Paris? Did you make it back to Paris, or what was the next step? I know there's Hong Kong in there somewhere.
Yeah, so after that stint, I came back briefly to pack up, but by then I decided, okay, I'm going to be a journalist. Right. So I had applied to journalism school. I went back to Chicago. I got my master's in journalism at Northwestern at the Medill School of Journalism. And Hong Kong was right after that. I moved to Hong Kong right after that.
Yeah. And the Hong Kong, did that come through connections that you made independently or through the Russia already? Are you in the pipeline of journalists that are considered sort of world?
No, so Hong Kong the guy who hired me in Moscow, I ended up marrying.
Okay. Okay.
And I had this great idea that since communism had collapsed in the Soviet Union, China was next, and we needed to get to China to cover the collapse of communism in China. Called that one wrong. And he was working for ITN at the time, the British TV network, and they covered China from Hong Kong.
Right.
So he had asked to be sent to China. They said, we can't send you there, we'll send you to Hong Kong. So So I was freelancing, he was working for them.
Okay. Wow. And what
Yeah.
kinds of stories happened in Hong Kong? Was it just as exciting, or something totally different?
It was totally different. So Hong Kong, this was when it was still a British colony. It was before the handover. So
Right.
there was some
Right. Right.
reporting. I did some reporting. I interviewed Chris Patton, who was the governor of Hong Kong at the time, and
Mhm.
there were the British governor, and there was some reporting on the handover. But Hong Kong at the time was a pretty exciting business story, and
Mhm.
it was when American companies were really just starting to move into China, a lot of it was in Guangzhou, which is the south of China near Hong Kong.
Mhm.
So a lot of what I did was business reporting. I wrote a lot for Crane's New York Business, Crane Chicago Business, branding stories about American companies. How do you keep your corporate culture in Chinese culture, and a lot of business stories, and a lot of, I was a really young journalist. I had to do whatever I could. I think I was writing a lot for USA Today too, and one of the Florida newspapers. But I was also doing stuff like writing for a publication called Electronic Components,
Yeah,
literally
sure.
writing about electron. You do what you have to do to
Right.
get started.
Right. Right. Look, I get it. Because the idea is to get your name out even more
Right.
and more and more and more, right? And
But the thing that you see a lot now with young journalists, and it's a good way to get started, just to go somewhere where there aren't a ton of established journalists and just fill in the holes. I did a lot of writing for USA Today, a lot of writing for the St. Petersburg Times,
mhm.
because they didn't have correspondence there.
Yeah, yeah. And how long were you in Hong Kong? You were there for a
So
couple
just
years.
under a year,
Okay.
because what I realized was that I had gone to Hong Kong thinking that this was going to be this way of exploring Chinese culture. And, I wanted that really intense cultural experience that I'd had in Moscow and in France. And we didn't have, first of all, I didn't speak Chinese. So, I'd spoken Russian and French. So a lot was closed to me. But also, because it was a British colony, there was a pretty strict divide between the Hong Kong Chinese and the Westerners, and
Mhm.
it was very hard to penetrate that well,
Mhm.
especially without having the language.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
after about a year, it just felt like I wasn't getting fully the cultural experience that I wanted. And we asked to be transferred back to the UK, and we
Okay.
were.
Well, speaking of culture, I want to delve into this because I think we talked briefly about this beforehand. What can you tell people your cultural background or your family background? Because I think it's a really important aspect of how you do what you do. I mean, just the fact, oh, I went to Russia and and I got this job, and there's an ease that even when we were in school, there is an ease that you gave off in terms of being able to move in
Yeah,
different groups and different circles. So it's not a surprise to me at all that you were doing this. It's just like, wow, okay, I was right, at least in my mind, that it's like she's gonna do something. She's gonna do something. This is what I was
well,
thinking.
so my mom's Dutch, my dad's Egyptian. I was born in New York. We lived in Westchester and Hartsdale till I was 7, and then we moved to California, to Southern California, surf town, right? Not at all
Mhm.
urban. It's Orange County. Now it's now it's known because we lived next to Laguna Beach, and they had the reality show. But back then there was nobody there, right?
Mhm.
Now they're fancy hotels. Then it was really just surf town. Um, and it was just white, right? It was just completely white. There was zero diversity. There were Mexicans that came up that worked in, did menial jobs, worked in fields, but other than
Right.
that, everybody was white American and mostly blonde. And I was, one of those things is not like the others, right? Like I just did not fit in. I just didn't fit the mold at all. And it was fine. I wasn't ostracized or anything like that, but I was very aware that I didn't fit the mold. And back there, then everybody fit a certain, it was kind of the Barbie ideal, right? And so I think that, and I had these crazy parents, and it was back in the 70s and early 80s, we forget how different the world is now. It was, now you go to the supermarket and there's all kinds of foods,
Right.
and but that didn't exist then. And so my house just looks so different than anybody's house. You know, you'd come in, my dad would have feta cheese in the refrigerator and that kind of water that feta comes in. My friends would come in and they'd be like, ooh, ick, what's that? I had friends, but I wasn't like them. And you know, I have family in Egypt, but I'm not like them. And I have family in Holland and I'm not like them. And so I think when you grow up as, you know, a third culture kid, they call it, you spend your life not knowing what it means to really fit in anywhere. And there's a downside to that, but the upside is, because you don't know what it feels like to really belong, you don't have that clan identity, you do move very easily between, you know, I had to move from my Dutch family to my Egyptian family to my American peers. I spent my whole life moving between groups. So when I got to Penn, it was much more natural for me to move than to join a group, you know?
Yeah. And I would see this, and look, there are a lot of us, not a lot, there's some of us that know how to do this as well, right? And I think Penn was a time where I perfected that, because my ability to move through circles was limited based on how I grew up. Now, I grew up all Black environment, mostly Black environment, but an integrated school in the beginning stages in Baltimore, then moving to Northern New Jersey, where it was integrated, but not so many Blacks, right? And I excelled in things like the arts, and, you know, I knew a lot of people, I knew everybody, but I did not fit into one group. Right. So I kind of had to, you know, surf through. And I was never, let's say I would not be the person that knew intimate details about people in those groups, but just knew enough to say, hey, you know, what's going on? How you doing? Blah, 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 that kind of thing. And so I can relate 100%. And so when you're thinking about, let me ask you this question. When you're doing these writings, these articles about Trump and I mean, let's dial back. How did you get involved with the Trump book? And then I'll ask some other questions. How did that come about for you?
So the Trump book came to me. It was a friend. So a friend had connected me to Barry, the co-author, my co-author, who, it was his project. He had launched the project. He'd worked on it for probably a good year before he approached me. He'd you know, written a proposal, sold the thing, or had a publisher interested, and they decided, for a couple of reasons, they wanted to get the book out really fast. So he wouldn't have had time to do the reporting he wanted to do and write at the same time. So he decided he needed a co-writer. They also thought, given the nature of the book, given the subject matter, it would be good to get a woman involved. So they approached me about writing it. And my initial impulse was to say no, because it was disgusting, right? The idea of spending, you know, because of the tight time frame, it was a real tense work schedule. So the idea of spending 7 days a week, morning to night, immersed in these stories of groping, insults, rape, you know, I just thought, oh, I don't want to do that. But I had spent a couple of years before then, I'd read the Ta-Nehisi Coates book, Between the World and Me. That got me really thinking a lot about the idea of complicity and how silence is complicity. And, you know, I thought that applied to this too, that if I wasn't actively standing up, especially once the opportunity came to me, if I wasn't going to respond to that by actively standing up and becoming part of the chorus of voices against that kind of behavior, then was I going to be complicit in allowing it to continue? And I talk about this in the book. I have 2 sons, and I'm always saying to them, if you see something that's wrong, you can't just turn a blind eye. You have to confront wrong wherever you see it. And I just thought, if I don't do that myself, how can I possibly tell my kids that they should be doing that? So I almost felt like I didn't have a choice after.
You didn't have a choice. Now, do you think that your upbringing or your background had anything to do with your decision, or at least your thought, to say yes to the book? Or in other words, is there anything, or can you think of anything that you experienced growing up that said, okay, now after thinking about it, I need to do the book, or I'm forced to do the book?
Well, I mean, my upbringing was not remotely feminist. So certainly not in a direct sense like that, right? I mean, I grew up
Mm-hmm.
evangelical, Egyptian father. It's all about women being submissive, and my mother was pretty, along those lines too. But I do think that, I mean, look, I think that, so I grew up in this, as you know, I grew up in this really evangelical, really Southern Baptist modeled school, really evangelical world, and got to Penn and kind of broke out
Mm-hmm.
and rebelled against it. That's what my first book was about, Evangelicals.
Right.
And so I think having cut myself off from everything I was raised to believe, it allows me now to kind of look at things without having a kind of, I think a lot of us are handed a set of beliefs and assumptions, and that it's very hard to go against, or
Yeah.
even to see outside of them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
because I cut myself off from all the assumptions that I've been given at 18, I think it allows me to look at things with a fresh eye. I also think that the Trump book, Trump is supported by evangelicals. And so I think having grown up in that allowed me to see it with a little bit more nuance than a lot of people who don't like Trump are able to see. They just see what's bad about him. And I was able, because I had so many friends who supported him, I was able to understand why somebody might support him.
Mm-hmm. And just briefly, why do you think, and we won't stay on this, but why do you think the evangelicals support him? What is it that you can make clear to people who are like, no, they can't see that?
Yeah, I mean, I had that reaction in the beginning. There's a whole, that's why I added a chapter to the book exactly about that.
Mm-hmm.
So before he was elected, when it was clear he was getting evangelical support, I called up one of my sources from the first book, from the evangelical book. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on? Like, this guy couldn't be further from an evangelical. Why are you guys supporting him? And he said to me, because of the judges. He said,
Mm-hmm.
Trump, we are convinced that Trump is going to appoint pro-life judges. And we are done supporting candidates because of their religious beliefs who don't deliver anything for us. We don't care what he actually believes. He's going to deliver for us. And he has. He's packed the courts on all different levels in a way that is somewhat invisible, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the Supreme Court. We see the two
Lower
Supreme
courts.
Court justices, the lower courts, all the way down. He's appointed more judges to federal courts than any president in recent memory. I mean, and what this guy said to me, and it's true, he said he's going to change the face of the judiciary for 2 generations to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably right. I think his legacy, even if he doesn't get a second term, his legacy it will be playing out for decades to come.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the judges are young.
And so with regard to the main aspect of the book, I can say that, right? Which is, his predatory behavior. Can you expand or detail to us what you found in your research? Maybe let's do it like this. In the beginning, when you started, how you felt and what you started to see, maybe in the middle, and then as you were finishing the book.
So I think there are a couple things. There are a lot of people that say, oh, okay, he's done these things. Is he really a predator?
Mm-hmm.
And, we'd all heard stories, right? When you take all the stories and you put them together and you read them as a piece, right? One after another, after another, after another. And you see these patterns emerge and types of women, and you realize it's not random, it's not occasional, it is systematic, and it's almost a compulsion for him, or so it seems when you read the stories. So that to me was pretty heavy, right? It's when you put them all together, it's heavy, it's big. And it is consistent predatory behavior in a way that I hadn't really considered before. There are a couple of other things. One of the things that really struck me is, our process was Barry, or he had a team of reporters working for him. They would go out and they would do the interviews with the women. they tracked down the women. They did the reporting on the women. I did the reporting on the kind of the evangelical stuff, but the women, the bulk of the book they did, and they would send me transcripts. So I would just be reading the transcripts one after another. And then I would, I wrote the book. And I remember there was a day when I was reading a chunk of transcripts, and almost every one of them ended with the woman saying, I never wore a short skirt again. I never wore that suit that I was wearing again. I looked at myself and I thought, how could you behave so dumb that he would think he could do that to you? And all of these women blame themselves. And for me, that was really sad, because when you're reading the stories all together, you realize it's almost not about the individual woman, right? If it wasn't Sally, it would have been Susie, right? It was about his need, his need to behave in that way, much more than it was about individual women. And yet the women really looked to themselves and in some sense blame themselves. And to me, that was, as a woman, very hard to see. It was understandable, but hard to see. And then finally, the thing that I really came away with, I think the book radicalized me in certain ways, is that I came away with a very strong conviction that none of this is about individual men. I mean, not none of it. It is about individual men, of course, and they're bad, but it's so much bigger and deeper than that. It's about society. It's about institutions. It's about organizations that, number one, let this go on. And I mean, you worked at NBC. NBC is a pretty strong example of this. Organizations like that not only let this go on for decades, but protected the men that were abusing women. And to me, we can send Weinstein to jail, Epstein, Cosby, we can send them all to jail. It's not going to stop until we change the societal attitudes and the institutions. And to me, the way that really the only way to do that is to make sure that 50% of seats in C-suites, 50% of seats in Congress, that 50% of those controlling the levers of power in America and globally are women. And until you get gender parity, I just think it's going to be very hard to really make fundamental change on this issue.
There's so many things there's so many questions and things that I have in my mind as you were saying this. The first is, there's a part in the book that talks about his early, I want to say childhood development, but as a young man growing up and his relationship with his father, right? Can you give the audience a little bit of what you found or what you uncovered in that during that part of the research?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, there's this book coming out by his niece, so that I'm dying to see, that the Trump administration is trying to stop it. His lawyers
really?
Trying to stop it. Yeah, so he had he had a brother, the oldest boy in the family, who died
From alcohol, right?
He was alcoholic, right? Alcohol-related problem.
Yeah.
And later on, the Trumps tried to cut his kids out of the will. It was pretty ugly. And now, and she's a psychiatrist, and so now she's coming out with a book basically how did this man get made? You'll have much more insight than we did.
Sure.
So that's an aside. I'm looking forward to reading that book. But so we went back and looked at his childhood, looked at his parents, his relationship with his parents, and his schooling. And because we felt pretty strongly, so there are all these stories, and we could just tell the stories, and that could be a book. But wanted also to sort of understand why, how this man came to be who he is, and then the end of the book looks at why it matters, what the effect of it is. But so we looked at his parents. He had a very strong, dominant, probably physically abusive father. And his mother was the sort of stereotypical, Trump describes her as the ideal woman because she cooked and cleaned and darned socks, and understood that when her husband had somewhere to be for work, he would just leave, that was, she came second, and that was the priority. So, he grew up in this incredibly kind of retrograde environment of very traditional gender roles. Then he went to an all-male school from the age of 13, so didn't interact with girls in any meaningful way. They would come up on weekends and whatever. And he has a classmate that we spoke to that talks about them learning about girls from Penthouse. Playboy, sorry. And Playboy at the time had a series called The Playboy Lifestyle or something like that. And he sort of taught you how to be a Playboy man. And Trump really, he absorbed those attitudes and he's never outgrown them. This class says, when I got out of the military academy, I realized that that's not an appropriate way to see women, to relate to women. And Trump seems to still be that 13-year-old boy that he was then. So,
it is interesting. I mean, the part that I read, which is the first part up until the models era. And I told you when I was reading that, I felt like I was transported back to my high school days, because when we were growing up in northern New Jersey, South Orange, New Jersey, Maplewood, New Jersey, Trump was in the news all the time, right? All the time. So this played out in front of us. He was a cast of characters such as Al Sharpton was, such as Rudy Giuliani is. Well, they still are characters, but they were in their heyday. And you had journalists like Geraldo Rivera, who they all seem to be in the same generation. So what I started to see, let's say when I was working in news, was this generation had a firm grip on what was going on in the media business. And I could see it, right in front of my face, right in front of, and I'll just, pivot. And there are a couple of other things that I want to mention. When I was working at MSNBC as a booker, most of the guests were people who were from that generation, in that age bracket. Those are the people that they would go to all the time. And so when we were in an emergency situation, breaking news, I would try to bring on people that were in my age bracket or some other person that represented a different point of view. And that's how we started to get some ratings, at least on the weekends or during, we started to crack certain demographics. Now, they never told me this. I would just, see them in the main room where they would have the big meetings and stuff, and their reaction after they would come out. That's how I would learn how to book a show.
Interesting.
Whether it was good or bad. Sometimes it was great and they were pissed off. But I could glean, hey, wait a minute, diversity is actually working here, and not just in terms of, race, right? It's working in terms of generational, because we'll go back to this, but I think our generation and the people that we know at Penn, we have a very different life experience than the people that we started to encounter, and the power people that had their hands on the lever, right, when we started going into these professions.
No question.
Right?
And it's true. It hasn't changed enough, but it's changed. You turn on especially in local news, right? You put it on the local news now, and you see all kinds of different people, people that would never have been on the air 30 years ago. So I think, you've seen some breakthrough, even in national news, you've seen some breakthrough. It's just not enough.
Yeah.
But living in France, I see the contrast more, because French television is all white people with blue eyes.
Yeah. They're still hanging it. There's certain things about France, and we'll talk about this later. There's so much. There's certain things about France that are very multicultural, right? But then there are other things that are like, they are behind the United States in a variety of ways, right? Anyway, so Trump's there. He seems to be formed by the relationship with his father, military school. His views on women are shaped by sort of the times then. Playboy was sort of was probably the biggest thing, right, at that time. When he started moving into the New York circles, this is another interesting part that you wrote a bit about. He trying to get into these real estate circles, and what he had to do in order to sort of, because all of the people seem to be older than he was, right? I mean, he was the youngest of that group, and no one really paid him any mind or attention or something like that. So he had to sort of maneuver, and some of the tactics that he used was sometimes he acted as his own PR person, right? And I think that's when.
Yeah, I mean that came a little bit later, but he was, I mean, even he was a blowhard, right? So his first big deal in New York was the Commodore Hotel.
Yes. Okay.
And, you know, and he had to, and he, I mean, he, all of this is in The Art of the Deal, his first book.
Right.
You know, kind of was robbing from Peter to pay Paul. He was saying he had approvals that he didn't have. It was all kind of a house of cards that he actually managed to pull off. He managed to pull off the Commodore Hotel. He managed to pull off some really big deals as a really young developer. And that earned him his chops in New York. I mean, until then, he was some kid from Queens that nobody had ever heard of.
Mm.
So, you know, the same thing we see today, the kind of bluster and the kind of, I'm going to very generously call it exaggeration.
Mm-hmm. Puffery, yes.
Right. I know, but I think it's probably out and out lying most of the time. Let's just call it exaggeration. First of all, it's who he is. He's done it forever, but it's worked for him. I mean, it's worked for him in the presidency, but it worked for him in real estate too. He did, you know, obviously he exaggerates everything, but he did manage to, you know, he wasn't totally full of it. He did manage to do some pretty impressive real estate deals back in the day.
Yeah.
And then he wanted to be bigger and more famous and whatever, and then he wanted to be, then he started getting into the press, into the New York press, which, as you know, is really insular, right? I worked at the Daily News, and so I had friends and colleagues who were there for the beginning of this. He started getting to the press, and he started liking that, and he started wanting more and more press. And that's when he would call journalists and pretend to be his own PR person and plant items about himself. He, especially around the time he was breaking up with Ivana, he would call people and say he was dating Carla Bruni and he had all these girlfriends, and, you know, and he was, I mean, but he was the source of amusement for journalists in New York. I mean, he was bigger than life. He was like this P.T. Barnum character. Nobody took him seriously, but he was fun to follow around. He was fun to write about. I mean, nobody ever thought that it would come to this.
All right. But then a lot of the interactions with the models came around this time, with women, right? So he's trying to build his rep as a man about town. And so it was important to him, at least, to be seen with a certain type of woman.
Right, as accessory. That's
an accessory, right?
What's the accessory of the rich man in New York? The model, right? That is the necessary accessory. So he made sure he had that.
And then as a result of doing that, being in all the right places at all the right times, dating certain models, being in the newspaper, it seemed to take on a life of its own. In other words, I don't want to call it the character, the person that we now know as the president had its, the makings, I think, during this time when he started making the deals.
Yeah.
And the women, and like all of these things had to have a certain place.
Right, and a role, right? And we see that now, that people for him, he doesn't have real human interactions. They're all about what they do for him, how they make him look, how they serve him. You know, when I was doing the book, I was talking to somebody I know who is a hairstylist in New York. And he was saying that he would blow dry. He would do Marla Maples' hair when she was on Broadway doing, what was the show? I can't remember the show, but she was on
something
Broadway.
With the boots or something, was she?
Exactly.
It was in some show. That's how her claim to fame. I don't remember this.
It's in the book. But anyway, so he was working in a salon across from Trump Tower. So Marla would get her hair blown dry there. This is before they were married. It was still sort of illicit. And Trump would come over and stand by her chair while she was getting her hair done. And he would look around to see who was watching him. He would go really just to be seen with her, to be seen in the presence of this young, sexy blonde. So yeah, I think for him, women are about, it's about, you know, look at me, look how, you know, virile I am, that I have this young, hot woman on my own. as
So,
opposed to
so,
being really interested in them.
so when did, at what point did it become predatory, right? I mean, in terms of, it's one thing to say, okay, I'm just trying to be the man. I'm want to associate myself, et cetera, build my reputation. At what point do you think, based on what you've researched, did it start to go left?
I think it started to become predatory towards the end of his marriage with Ivana. There's a Penn story in the book. Do you know that? I'm segueing for a second.
I did see Penn mentioned in the book. Yes.
He went, before he transferred to Penn from Fordham,
Yes.
he set sights on Candace Bergen.
Right. He dated her. He took her out once. Yeah.
He took her out once. But anyway, that wasn't really predatory. She seemed predatory. She seemed to be pretty in control of the whole thing. But so the first story that we have is at the end of his marriage with Ivana. That's the story of, there was this woman, Jessica Leeds, who he groped on an airplane. Do you remember that story? That was one of the stories that came out during the campaign. And that was late, sort of the very end of the 70s. I think in the beginning of his marriage with Ivana, I actually think it was probably a real marriage in the beginning. And we found this, Googling online, I found this trove of photos that are amazing. We licensed some of them and have them in the book, but people can Google them. It's like daily. They were published by the Daily Mail. This woman in Florida bought a suitcase from a thrift shop and opened it up, and there were more than 1,000 Trump family photos. And it was Trump with Ivana and Don Jr. when he was a tiny baby. And you see Trump holding Don Jr. There's a picture of him changing a diaper, so he lies when he says he's never changed a diaper. And they are adorable. They look like this cute, happy young couple. And, they reminded me of the photos of my parents. And you just think, you look at those photos and you're just like, oh my God, what happened, right? He was good looking. They looked normal and happy. And I think that, it was sort of like this slide. Remember the movie Sliding Doors? It was kind of this sliding door moment.
Yeah.
But something switched for him. And at the in the late 70s, the first story we have is Jessica Leeds. Who knows if she was the first? And he starts to get more and more rotten, right? It's like an apple going bad. And the stories start to pick up. And at the end of so then he has this affair with Marla, right? Marla Maples.
Yeah.
And his marriage to Ivana ends. And then it's like the floodgates opened. And then he just kind of went on this rampage and was groping and, doing worse. And so when his marriage to Ivana ended, or when he started seeing Marla, that's really when it all just starts becoming, it seems pathological. And then it descends into just full-on predatory behavior. He's hitting on underage girls. It's just constant, multiple girls at a party. It's pathological.
There's something else that I'm thinking about, which is Ivana seemed to have a real business sense, right? So in the beginning, things were, normal, I guess, in their world, right? And as she became more successful, and as because it seemed as if they built their empire together, or his empire together.
Yep.
And she had a major role in his company. And there was a time where it got to be too much for him. And that's when this is my perception, just reading the book and knowing what I remember from back in the day, that's when things started going south.
Right. She started getting her own profiles in Vanity Fair. She stopped being the wife of,
right,
and became her own media persona, and he did not like it. There's a story, and you could have seen that coming. There's a story that we put in the book. When they first started dating, he took her skiing, and he didn't know that she had been a competitive skier. And she didn't tell him. He said, do you want to go surf, sea or snow? She said snow, not explaining. So the first day they're there, they go to the mountain and she just zips down because she's a competitive skier.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, she's good. Yeah.
He said she was an Olympic skier. She wasn't an Olympic skier, but she was a maybe professional, but certainly a serious skier. And he was so pissed off, he took his boots off and walked down the mountain. And, he said, I can't remember, we have the quote in the book, but basically I'm not going to be shown up by anybody, even Ivana. And that sort of encapsulates his character. He needs to be number one. He needs to be the dominant one. And when she started to outshine him, that was the end for him.
Look, it's interesting.
That's it.
I mean, interesting person, interesting guy. I mean, like, and we're living. I told my younger sister, Janine, in an email or text, I said, I feel like I'm living South Orange, New Jersey 2.0 all over again, but now it's global. Right. So he's the leader of the free world, so-called free world. So the vibe that we are going through, I would even say COVID, Black Lives Matter, in other words, when we were in New York, when he was in the news, everything was sort of just boom, 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 all of these moves, shakes, and quakes, right? Now that he's the leader of the free world, it seems like we're ripping through so many different world events a month, sometimes two in 1 month.
Yeah, that's interesting. You think that he kind of brings some of that stuff to the surface? That's interesting.
I mean, my own experience, maybe we can talk about in another interview or conversation rather, but I've had experiences with people like Donald Trump, both men and women. And because I've had so many, I now know how to approach the situation when I meet someone like him. Right. And I should also tell you, and I think I told you, well, I told the audience that I actually applied for the Apprentice show.
Yeah, you
twice.
told me. Yeah.
The first time I mailed something in and I got a call. Right. And I was like, oh my God, you know. And the second time I actually waited online around the corner from, and it was a big, what is it, like park, and like these blocks are big, right?
Right.
From Trump Tower. So we waited, I think it was like 3 or 4 hours to get in.
Wow.
When we got in, they stopped letting people in. We were in the, you know, the what is it, the foyer, I don't know what you call it. The main area where the escalator is, right?
The main escalator, right?
Yeah, that escalator, right? So we're there, and there's a bunch of guys that I was hanging out with, and one blonde woman in our little crew. I didn't know any of them. So here he comes, like it was almost like, you know, there would have been some sort of trumpet, but they didn't have a trumpet. It was like this whole thing was orchestrated, right? And everybody's like, all right, I guess he's coming, right? So he comes down the escalator and he walks down this, you know, down the center of Trump Tower, and we're sort of like in a royal line, right? As he's looking and inspecting everybody that's coming to be a part of his show, right? Very, very tall, 6'3" or 6'4", broad and big now, like also out, you know, stomach. And there's the blonde woman in our group says, oh, he probably, you know, I probably won't get picked, or no, something like that, right? He comes past us, and we're in a little cluster like this. He stops cold right in front of us, and he specifically talks to the blonde woman and asks, what is your name? And everybody looked at her like, you know, kind of like parted so that he could have access to her, and, you know, and it was a shock, right? I was like, from that point on, I was like, I already know what I'm dealing with. I already know what I'm dealing with. I already knew that the cards or the chips were stacked against me from that point on. And I couldn't say, I hate the guy, he's unfair, or this. I just knew what I was getting into.
That's totally his MO. I mean, that story we saw repeated over and over, right? He's like a truffle pig, right? He can smell them miles away.
I mean, it's like, I was stunned because it was so sharp. It was like, he didn't even pretend like, hey, how you doing? How you doing? Like, I would have played it on the, how you doing? How you doing, fellas? He was like, what is your name? Very nice to meet you, and ignored everybody else and kept moving with the, you know, I guess the entourage of people there. And at that point, I knew, I wouldn't say my heart sank, but I knew it was like, you know what? This is like Charlie Rose all over again. Like, I mean, I don't even know. I think that was after Charlie Rose. It had to be after Charlie Rose. It was 2003 or 5. So as soon as he did that, because I worked at Charlie Rose as an intern, I said, this is Charlie. This is another Charlie Rose. Like, I knew it. And I went as far as the first round, went to the Sunday audition, and immediately felt creeped out because the people, he wasn't there, but there were people from LA representing him. And the audition, I felt like, I was like, is this a casting couch or what? Like, I mean, it was so not my world, because there was a woman there, a blonde woman, tall blonde woman, very curvaceous and designer jeans and stuff. She had a lot of plastic surgery on her face. Even then, I could tell. And then this guy who was sort of the typical Hollywood producer guy. And I was like, oh, come on. Like, what in the world? So I came back for an audition. I had a raincoat on. It was raining outside. I was like, I can't do it. Can't do it. Not gonna. I cannot fake the funk. It's not gonna go.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of faking that. We interviewed a couple of people from The Apprentice for the book, and I told you I've since been in touch with one of them. And I think there was a lot of faking going on, a lot of stuff for the cameras, and then completely different behind the scenes. It was pretty sordid stuff happening.
I knew right then and there. It's like I knew everything. It was like, you know what, Dave, you're not going to be able to do it. That was what my gut was saying. You're not going to be able to do it. You're not ready to do it. So, I look at what he's doing now, and I have mad respect for him because he doesn't hold back. Like, there's certain things that we can learn from him, which is like, you know what? Don't overthink things sometimes. You can be a little bit, like, hey, let's just do it. Right? You know what I mean? And screw the consequences.
He is that.
That is what I get, right? And that's what I got out of the entire thing. Like, go big. But on the other hand, which is, like, he has stepped on a lot of toes, right? He has done things that people
more than that. I mean,
he's done more than step on toes.
He blatantly crossed a lot of lines that should never be crossed.
And I also knew that. Let me just tell you something. We're going to jump to your life, more about you. I knew at that moment, I said, this is going to cost me a lot of money. Like, in my mind, this is going to cost me a lot of money.
To do it or not to do it?
Money. It's going to cost me money.
To do it. To do it, you mean?
To go through whatever I need. Why am I doing, like, do I need to do all of this? Mm-hmm. Because I know there's a big cost, and am I willing to pay that cost? Because if already I'm looking at him coming down the escalator and he stops at the woman, I'm like, all right, so he's not really about like us. He's not about us.
Right. That whole thing about we're going to give opportunity to people.
No, that's like second or third. That's second or fourth or fifth.
Right.
Anyway, the thing that I want to jump to is that in one of these articles that either it was a TV or an article, you talked about your relationship with your now current husband, right?
Did I? Okay, yeah, probably.
I somehow read it and I said, this is the story. I said, this is the story. So I can't close without asking about the story, because this is the story. This is the story. This is bigger than Trump. So there's an article out there somewhere. It says, it talks about you're married to a man that's 20 years younger?
22 years younger.
22 years younger. And how that all, give people a taste, particularly for the women out there who I know they're interested in hearing the story. So I want to bring it up, and you, however you feel comfortable in telling it.
Yeah, so what part of it do you want to know about? I mean,
the part where, okay, you meet him. This is the part I know. You met him on Facebook, or and he's part of a journalist group or something like that. He reached out as a journalist saying, hey, I'm going to be working in Egypt, I think. I want to know like what your thoughts are, or can you tell me about,
So I lived in New York forever, was married for 20 years. My marriage in New York fell apart, and I did what you do. I moved to Egypt, right? I was like, I'm getting out of here. Took my 2 kids. I moved to Egypt.
Now, why Egypt? Why Egypt? Like, why can't?
Because I had been, after the Evangelical book came out, I had gone to Egypt. My dad's Egyptian. I hadn't been for a few years because I was working on the book and had a second kid and hadn't been. And I guess I'd been away for about 5 years. And the country had completely changed. And I had decided I was going to do a book about Egypt and the changes in I felt that there were competing forces in Egyptian society that couldn't coexist. And I was going to write that book. And so in nonfiction, you write a proposal and you sell a book on the basis of the proposal. So I did a proposal saying exactly that, handed it to my agent in early January 2011, flew to Paris to do an article here that I was going to do, turned on the TV in my hotel room, and there are hundreds of thousands of people in Tahrir Square. And I got back and my agent said, you don't have a book anymore. And I said, I know, because what I thought, I certainly didn't predict a revolution, but these forces that I thought couldn't coexist, in fact, couldn't, it all blew up. So then I was going back and forth trying to figure out how to salvage the book. And then my marriage fell apart. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to move to Egypt, figure out how to do the book, which I never did, and run away from the painful memories of, my 20-year marriage. It was total escape. And so I was there for 2 years. And so about 2 years after I was in New York, it took me a year to get to Egypt. So my marriage fell apart in 2012, and in late 2014, I'm living very happily in Cairo. I loved it. The kids loved it. It was just an incredible experience. One night I'm about to go to sleep. I look at my phone and there's a message on Facebook from this guy who says, I'm a Tunisian journalist. I'm coming to work for the BBC in Cairo. I don't know anybody there. And this is very common among journalists, as you know, right? There's kind of this, you can approach journalists pretty easily. Can you give me advice about where to live and, real estate agents and whatever? And he was completely lost. He thought he wanted to live like 2 hours from his office. I was like, no. I knew somebody in the neighborhood. So I gave him some information, and that was that. We chatted a little. And then, but I had literally that day started thinking, you know what, I'm ready to start dating, right? And so, but he sends me the message, and he's good looking, but I Google him and I can see that I'm now at this point in my 40s, and there's no way I can get him to be over 30, right? Googling him, trying to think, he covered this and he did this, and I'm trying to figure out how old he is. So I'm like, whatever, he's way too young. So he gets there and he says, can we meet for a coffee? And we ended up meeting for a drink. And it was this weird, instantaneous connection. And so, he called me again. Actually, it was funny. He messaged me 48 hours later. And I was like, oh, I read that book. I read the rules too.
You know that? So wait, look, when they ask you for coffee, does that mean something?
No, I really thought it was just a journalist, trying to meet another journalist. And for me, I had felt that I was stuck in this expat English speaking bubble, and I really wanted to get out and speak more Arabic and get out. And I thought, oh, here's a guy who's a Tunisian, so an Arabic speaker, he's going to help me speak more. Because in Egypt, it's sort of like in Holland, if they hear you have an American accent, they respond to you in English. And I was like, this is going to help me infiltrate Arabic culture, right? So that, I really was planning on using him for that. And so we started dating, and it felt ridiculous, right? He was 22 years younger than me. Exactly. We have the same birthday, which means for our cohort that he was born the year we graduated Penn. And I struggled with it, and I think he struggled with it. He was disowned by his family for a while for dating me, and because he comes from a conservative family in Tunisia.
Sure.
But and I write about this in the piece. I spent a lot of time second guessing myself and how can I do this, and it's crazy, and and I was not somebody who liked the idea of being with a younger man. But I realized if it was opposite, right? If I was with a man 22 years older than me, nobody would think anything about it. Yeah. And I am a feminist. I consider myself a feminist. And I thought, if I really believe that men and women are equal and these societal norms are ridiculous and that people should be free to do what they want to do, then why am I hung up on the things that I wouldn't be hung up on for somebody else? Yeah. And there was this one moment, we were at the theater. This was later. We were in Paris, and we walked into our seats to see actually Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey was here, and we
Okay.
went to see them, and we walked in front of a gay couple who kind of gave us a look because I'm older than him, and I just thought, really, and I thought, I am so okay with you being gay. Why are you not okay with me having a gay boyfriend? And to me, that was this moment where I thought, why am I judging myself more harshly than I would judge anybody else? If
Right.
I think everybody else should be able to live the way they want to live, why don't I give myself that own freedom, that same freedom? But what was interesting is, so I did this piece for Cosmo. That's the piece you saw. I'm dating a man 22 years younger than me. And I still get emails from women.
I bet.
Still get emails from women saying, dating this younger guy, my family thinks I'm crazy. What should I do? And I realized that we as women often need permission to do what we want to do if it's not what society tells us we should do.
Right. Interesting.
So, yeah.
It is interesting. And let me ask you another question. When you said you felt silly, did you say that? You said, I felt dumb, or you said I felt silly? Which one was it?
Probably silly.
Silly. And why did you feel silly? Because and what was it about the situation that you're like, oh God, I feel silly? Like, I mean, what was
stereotype of a cougar, right? Like, and somehow It feels like being with a man so much younger, it must just be about how he looks, about sex. Like I think that the stereotype of that and the assumption is that it's not a serious relationship, that it's just about something light and easy.
Yeah. Well, look, let me tell you something. The fact that it's interesting because you're writing in these different areas of sex and gender and race. Let's say race and religion. These are really controversial. I mean, these are really controversial, right? And I think, and I'm going to say this, I think, again, people in our generation were confronted with these issues head on.
Yeah.
Right? Unlike some of the people we were trying to get jobs from when we graduated. I mean, it was a wake-up call for me. I mean, that's another story altogether of how many jobs I didn't get, right? And the people that were, doing the hiring. So when we talk about the Me Too that's now happening, when we talk about the Black Lives Matter and this political, I mean, I feel like I'm going through it again, even though I'm here in Switzerland. It's like the emotion that I felt in the 80s is now revisiting us in a global way.
Because it hasn't changed that much. I mean, I think I told you this when I did the Evangelical book, there was some discussion, should I change my last name for the book, right? Could you have an Arabic last name that has certain connotations, religious connotations with it, on a book about Christianity? And when the Trump book came out, and when I looked at comments on articles and stuff, that came up again. How can this person with that last name be writing about American politics? It's, I think those identity issues, race, gender, whatever they are, I think they've made some progress, but they're still very much with us.
There are a couple other things, and then we're going to close as we're going long, but have you heard about the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp story?
Yep.
And as I don't know if everybody knows this, but Amber Heard is an actress, a much younger actress, identifies as bisexual from what I understand. And she not only married Johnny Depp. Yeah, she married Johnny Depp. And she came out with allegations of abuse, right? Assault, abuse.
Photos, I think.
Right, photos as well. And now what's starting to happen is that there's being evidence unearthed that it could be much different than what everyone thought it was, right?
Yeah.
And so I bring that up. And also there's the story about, and we're going to focus on celebrities just because it's easy. Wendy Williams and her husband, Wendy Williams, a talk show host, who her husband was the producer or co-producer of the show, for years and years, directed a lot of things behind the scenes. Turns out, I think he had a 12-year affair with someone. And I think they're in the throes of, if not already divorce, but some sort of alimony, right? So I bring these two examples up because it used to be one size fits all for the law, right? You know, now what's happening is because women are, I believe, women have a lot more power. I think there are more women in the workplace now, I think more so than ever. When I'm on LinkedIn and I look through LinkedIn, I see women with titles and responsibilities that we would not have been able to imagine when we graduated. But with that also comes sort of these other things, right? Like alimony, power in a relationship. You know, how do you see that playing out now that women, I believe women have more access, more power? It may not seem like it based on what's in the news, but when you really take a look, I mean, there are more women doing things now than there were in 1989,
There are more.
1979.
I mean, there's certainly more. I still don't, I think we're still far from parity, but yeah, there are more. And I think that, you know, if we want parity and we want equality, that, you know, with power comes responsibility. And I think that it is only fair to hold women accountable for the same kinds of behaviors that you want to hold men accountable for, or different kinds of behavior, right? But, you know, women may not behave exactly like men, but whatever, if women reach these levels, and even if they don't, I think, you know, I don't think women should get a free pass in anything. I think that you want women to behave with the same integrity that you want men to behave with. And if it's a woman making the money during a divorce, then it's only fair that it shouldn't be about gender, right? These things should not be about gender. They should be about the facts. So if person X is making more money than person Y during a divorce, then regardless of gender, you know, and I mean, you're giving examples of women with men, but the same thing is going to be true for same-sex couples. Right. For, you know, I think the law is going to have to evolve and become gender blind, race blind, right? And look at just people as people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's all that we have. Is there anything else that you would like to add or express?
Nope. Just, I mean, so much, right? We could do this for another 6 hours, but no, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Hey, look, even though you didn't go to law school, you are in some way affecting policy. You know that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, I mean, am I affecting policy?
Well, yeah, because I mean, you're writing, but you're writing on these major issues, right? And you're seeing your public, right?
I think that, look, I do think that journalism plays a really important role in democracy, and I think these times have really tested that. But you know, there's a quote from Thomas Jefferson that gets kind of bastardized all the time, but the upshot of it is that a healthy democracy relies on an informed electorate, and you need the media to do that. I think that the media is not in the best place these days. I think that, you know, it's become partisan. Everybody's living in echo chambers that I find really worrying. I think that's really dangerous. There's not, you know, the newspapers are not well funded. Local newspapers are dying out. We're seeing a dearth of investigative journalism, although it's starting to come back. Trump has actually been good for journalism. There's more money going into it. But, you know, so yes, I think despite all that, I do think that the press still has a really important role to play in shining lights on, you know, illuminating things that are going on in the dark and informing people. So yeah, I think that, yeah, I don't know if, you know, I personally am affecting policy, but certainly the profession is an important one in that.
Yeah. Well, with that, Monique, it has been a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine.
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot. We were running through these topics, but you know, it is what it is, right?
Yep, you get old enough, you got a lot to talk about.
Yes. Well, with that, I'm going to let you go, and right. We'll talk to you soon. We'll have you come back when you want, or maybe we'll, you know, when there's another topic, we'll reach out to you.
All right.
and we'll get this posted as soon as possible.
I'll see you in Philly one of these days.
Yeah, we have, hopefully, right? If we can get out.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself. Have a great rest of your weekend, okay?
You too. Thanks.
Ciao.
Bye.